So this prompt on Monday, which is going to be the 17th, I believe, 10/17. That's when you're going to be answering this prompt, and it's going to be very much like the one you did yesterday. This prompt sheet you can bring in with you. You can brainstorm. You can outline stuff on it. I'm okay with that. You are not using your book for the TWA, so hold it in the pages is not going to be sitting before you, but ideas, concepts, brainstorming that you have on that sheet, you can certainly use. I'll have extra copies of the prompt available if something happened to yours and it got destroyed or whatever the case may be. But any markings that you have on here, by all means, you can go ahead and use. The notes would be regulated to this sheet just like the last time. So you're not going to come in with this one and then like a notebook of ideas. Now, because you don't have the book in front of you, you are not required to do specific quotations or anything like that. This is not rhetorical analysis. We'll take a look at here in the question. But you don't have to have specific quotes from the book. Now, certainly, if you find some quotes from the book that you want to use, some passages, and you write them on the piece of paper, that's fine. That's not a requirement. Certainly, there are going to be some lines that are probably memorable to you, that you might be able just to quote from the top of your head. That's certainly fine. But theoretically, Jack could not have a single quotation from the book. That doesn't mean your essay is going to be inherently poor or anything like that. So, question we're taking a look at. One definition of madness is mental delusion or eccentric behavior arising from it. But Emily Dickinson wrote, American poet, much madness in divinest sense to a discerning eye. Novelists and playwrights have often seen madness with a discerning eye, and J.D. Salinger is no different, as Holden Caulfield's apparent madness or irrational behavior plays an important role in the novel's development. Write a well-organized essay rationalizing how Holden's delusion or eccentric behavior may or may not be judged reasonable. Explain the significance of the madness to the work as a whole. So you pretty much have two things that you have to take care of, or you're going to have to explain for the essay to be successful. What's one of those two things? Besides putting your name on a piece of paper. Okay, so and it's going to be your call, much like the muckraking journalist from yesterday. Do you view his behavior, whether delusional, eccentric, whatnot, do you judge it as being reasonable? Abigail could say yes. Big Al could say no. You could have a split personality while writing this essay. Just don't write both viewpoints at the same time. That would get confusing. So you're going to have to pick one or the other. I don't care which one you pick. Some of you absolutely understand Holden's thought process and you think, well, it might not make sense, or you condone it for everyday behavior. You think it's reasonable based on things that have happened to him. Others of you are going to be steadfast against anything Holden says or does because you can't find any logic, any reason behind it whatsoever. It makes no difference which side you pick, just so long as you explain your reasoning, your logic behind it, much like you did yesterday. And then the second thing you're going to have to do comes right after it. Explain the significance of the madness. So regardless of whether you agree with it or not, what is the significance of the madness to the work as a whole? How does it contribute to Salinger's overall purpose, ideas, concepts that he wants to present to the audience? Those are basically the two things that you would have to do. So if I said, okay, you have 20 minutes, grab your lined paper, go. Besides going, can I have more time, please? What could you view as being stumbling blocks, roadblocks, obstacles that could keep you from doing it? Or would you go, hey, I think this would be pretty easy because I could go, boom. What's that? Oh, I should be on the time. I'll give you 40 minutes. I'll write you a pass so you can go late to 5th period. Okay, you can take your paper, start. You just said okay. What's going to be problems? Potential problems, issues, concerns. This is good. I don't have to explain anything. So coming up with support. Okay. Because you can't quote from the book, or Okay, so being able to get relevant support. Okay. Yeah, and that's a big deal. One of the questions that you might ask yourself is, how would the book be different if Holden's not in it? Like, if you were to take another character and insert him or her in Holden's place, would it still work? Or how would it be different? Why does Salinger have to incorporate this guy into the book? Would be a way to think about it. I would say there is one significance that I don't want you to use because it's terrible. Anyone want to make a guess? Not could still incorporate that. I don't have a problem with that. The cop-out response tends to be, well, he uses this character to make his book more interesting. That's a terrible response. So what is the purpose? What is he trying to achieve through it? Yes, there's certainly going to be an entertainment value. Entertainment sells, if I can say the word right. You know, people want to buy a book that they're going to be interested in or read a book that they're interested in. But I think merely to go entertainment value is not going to be enough. So make sure you go beyond making the book interesting. Okay. Anything else? How much do you have to incorporate from Emily Dickinson up here at the top? Jack, you're making like scary eyes.
I don't think it's incorporated really anything.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't want to use it, don't use it. I mean, that's part of the introduction to kind of the idea, you know, bringing up behavior and madness and whatnot. But that is not a requirement to incorporate it because you're focusing on Holden Caulfield, J.D. Salinger. If there's something from that you want to utilize so far as an attention grabber or make reference to it, that's fine. But we're not going to go, Emily, great essay about Salinger and Holden, but why didn't you mention Dickinson? She's just kind of an attention grabber to the prompt in itself. So really, the points that you are focusing upon is going to be his behavior. Do you agree or disagree with it, or do you at least find it reasonable? You could disagree with his behavior, but still find it to be reasonable. You could still certainly find it to be unreasonable, and then explain the overall significance to that madness within the work as a whole.
Trying to define what reasonable is.
And that's that's going to kind of be up to you, and I think that's a good point. We might have varying levels of what is reasonable. Certainly, I think if you look at the behaviors within a vacuum, you know, him asking every single person that he meets over the age of 12, do you want to get a drink? We could look at it as that not being reasonable. Do you think, rhetorical, not that you have to answer it, do you think that based on things that have happened to him, it makes sense that he would do some of those things? That's where you could kind of deem it as being reasonable. That could be very well part of your introduction and even first body paragraph kind of explaining what is not reasonable, which I think does kind of lend into the main question that most people have, even if they may not realize it or don't want to ask it yet. What's the overall structure of the essay going to be? And it's going to vary from person to person. There's not going to be one size fits all for this. Certainly you have some time frame constraints within 40 minutes, although I think you realized from yesterday, if you know what you're going to write, 40 minutes can be a fair amount of time to get your ideas down on paper. So hopefully that at least alleviates those concerns a little bit. Knowing that you're going to have an introduction, and pretty certain that you're going to have a conclusion, what do you think you would put in the middle? I would say, if time's a concern, as you were going through your body paragraphs, what's the first paragraph that I'm sacrificing? See ya. and I can probably still tie up my argument, within a body paragraph if need be. But anybody have any thoughts as to how you're going to set it up in the middle? Besides going, I'll use some body paragraphs.
You could answer the first question they're asking in the first paragraph.
Okay, so like the whole reasonable behavior, whether or not you think it's reasonable. All right, so. Oops. Switch to red. Yeah, I would say it would make sense to kind of answer that question. Is his behavior reasonable? I would also say that within the introduction, you'll probably clarify what your viewpoint is. So you will clearly defend, refute, or qualify. The other thing that I would also try to include within the introduction is going to be that overall significance. You don't have to save that for the end. His behavior is not reasonable, but it's still important to the book because it allows Salinger to do this, and you include. There wasn't a whole lot of it yesterday, but it still did creep up into some introductions. I believe, I feel, I think that, and I would stay away from that. It's not so much that the use of I and me is bad, because within an argumentative essay, it can be necessary if you're pulling examples from, your own personal experience. But if you go, I think his behavior is not reasonable versus Holden's behavior is not reasonable, the second one has a more assertive feel to it, a more assertive tone. You going, I think, I feel, I believe, almost kind of qualifies it. This is what I think, but it's okay, Ray, if you disagree with me, whereas his behavior is reasonable. This is the point, and now I'm going to explain it to you. So I would try to still stay away, not try, I would stay away from that I think, I feel, and whatnot. Rose, not trying to put you on the spot. Any idea if you think you'd go? It is reasonable or not?
I'd say it's not reasonable.
Okay, and you might change your mind between now and when you write the essay. That's okay. What would be, and I'm not saying this is all going to go into body paragraph 1, but kind of brainstorming. What would be examples of unreasonable behavior on Holden's part? General things. Don't even have to get into specifics quite yet.
Oh, well, I think,
What were you going to say?
asking every person he meets if they want to do anything,
Okay.
that's fairly unreasonable. Because he's not even old enough to drink at that age.
So the focus on alcohol.
Well, I guess the focus on trying to act like an adult when he's a teenager.
Okay. You realize you're giving me ammunition to insult you. Like, Jack, your opinion doesn't matter. You're a teenager. You're not an adult. Okay. Trying to act like an adult.
He criticizes everybody for being phony, but he calls himself a great liar. So
And both would work. Do you want it to be like calling people phonies, or that you find them to be hypocritical?
Hypocritical.
Okay. I think for what we're doing, hypocritical might work a little bit better too. I'll explain why. Anything else?
He acts really weird around other people, like when his teacher was doing whatever, he got really upset about it.
Okay.
It's kinda like-
Acting weird it's like reasonable. It can mean a lot of things to different people. Would you say like overreacts to situations? Okay.
Going on with what Rose said, he's extremely paranoid about everything. Like no matter who or what the situation is or about.
My R's don't look like R's today. Where is he? And I don't mean like in his story. I don't mean the mental institution, but like in his account, in his story, where is he? For the most part, he's in New York City. He's not where? School or home? He's avoiding home. So I wouldn't say that he has completely run away, but certainly the idea that he does not want to confront parents and whatnot, or you could put at the very least avoiding, you could put problems. Some people might put responsibility. Anything else? And again, this isn't the finite list, the only 5 that we can go with. Okay, but this would certainly work. So, is his behavior reasonable? Well, for Rose or anyone else to explain why it is or isn't, we have to have specific behaviors that we are going to look at. So, I think it would certainly make sense within body paragraph number 1 to choose a behavior. Rose, you mentioned the whole overreacting idea. So you could have your example of how he overreacts. Now, what's going to be the problem if a person writes, one of Holden's unreasonable behaviors is the fact that he overreacts to everything. No matter what happens, he makes a mountain out of a molehill. He makes a lot of the problems worse. If that's the paragraph, what's my comment going to be? Support, elaborate, details, question mark, specific examples, question mark. So now you would want to come up with what are specific examples of him overreacting. And I would say it'd be a good idea to have, 2 to 3 examples. I don't remember who brought up the question so far as support, relevant support. Livia, was you the one who mentioned that? You don't have to go into specific quotations by, any means as mentioned, but can you certainly describe situations where he does overreact? Yes, you can, without quoting. Rose was mentioning with Mr. Anzolini. You can give an account of how he overreacts in that scene without quoting, but still demonstrating, showcasing your knowledge, your understanding of the book. So for the ideas that you go with, and Matt, when mentioned hypocritical might work a little bit better, if you were to go with him being hypocritical, and tell you what, why don't we write this for body paragraph number 2. By me going hypocritical, or typocritical, now for specific details, what would be some things that, like you were mentioning, that I could go into detail about?
He calls people phonies. He calls himself a really good liar.
Now, you going he calls people phonies. If it just stayed there, that would not be enough. Because you could be in this room for 15 seconds while we were talking about the Catcher in the Rye, and you would know at some point he calls people phonies. But if Matt goes into a specific situation where he is calling people phony, or he's criticizing people for some of the behaviors that he himself uses, that's going to be perfect evidence. That'll be good, strong evidence for it. This is a behavior that he criticizes, but here's where he does the same thing anyway. Now you're going into specific details about it. So for the behavior being reasonable, I would say you would want to do at least 2 general behaviors, 2 general traits of his, which you would defend that it is reasonable, or you would explain, no, it is not reasonable under any circumstances, and here's why, and then you back that up with those multiple examples. Any questions about that? If you stopped there, you can't get above a 4. Because what have we still not done? You haven't done that second part where you explain the overall significance. And this is probably where some people are going to take different approaches to how they're going to go about setting it up. You could still keep a 4-paragraph model, intro, body 1, body 2, conclusion. And what would you do with the overall significance? Make it the second part of the paragraph. What color do you want, Abby? You want blue? Like a bright blue? I think that's bright blue. It's kind of like the other blue. So, what then is the overall significance of this overreaction to that meaning of the work as a whole? What is that overall significance to that hypocritical behavior, to to the meaning of the work as a whole. And you could tack that on to the end of those paragraphs. That's going to end up being, ideally, probably a pretty lengthy paragraph. That's not bad. It's just going to be a lot of detail to it. I think some people would probably prefer to take a different approach, and again, it does not matter. It's totally your call, where rather than tacking those things onto the end of the existing body paragraphs, what's the other option that you have? You could have a body paragraph where you just focus solely on overall significance to the meaning of the work as a whole. So you would do overall significance of first part, overall significance of second part. That's up to you. Structurally, for you as a writer, what works better? You could go with the 2-body, you could go with the 3. I think some people get afraid that I'll forget to do the overall significance, or what if I have 5 minutes left to write that paragraph and I'm saving it for the end, I'm not going to be able to fully develop it. I feel better knowing that I've included at least some of it in that first body paragraph. The first body and the second body. Some people, I think, go that I'm going into a lot of detail about hypocritical behavior or whatever behaviors come up. I'm already mentioning 2 to 3 examples. I'm not going to feel like I have a really consistent flow, rhythm, continuity to that paragraph. I think I'd be able to go into better detail about it if I pull all those things together in the third body paragraph. Certainly works. Both ways have worked very well for people. The main thing is making sure, as with any kind of DRQ, that you do have your examples. And then this is kind of like a DRQ analysis, where this is almost like that rhetorical analysis. Why does it matter? You don't have to mention metaphors, symbolism, any of those things, but you're still explaining that overall purpose idea whenever you get to overall significance.
Do we need multiple behaviors, or is there a set number that we need?
I would. You're talking about like this list that we were doing over here. I would go with at least 2, because if you're going to judge someone's behavior as being reasonable or unreasonable, I think it's good to have multiple things as to, okay, this is why it is good or is not. So I would go with 2 behaviors. I would keep it general, because it's still going to be relevant, but the more general, wide open you keep it, it gives you better opportunities to get those specific examples. Where Matt kind of puts himself behind an 8 ball, he calls everybody a phony. All of his examples now have to be dealing with phoniness if he goes with that. Overall significance paragraph, besides Holden, what other name is going to show up probably in that paragraph? Allie could. Might not for everybody. But I would say Phoebe. Kind of like Allie, I think it could, depending on the... Salinger needs to show up in here, because when you get to this part, what is the overall significance? You are looking at Salinger's, what's the big P word? Purpose. Remember, we did soapstone about this kind of stuff. So why is this significant to what Salinger is trying to get across? So make sure he does become a big part of that paragraph. Certainly Allie could be in there, Phoebe could be in there. It's probably going to depend upon the examples that you take. But you want to make sure you do drive home Salinger's aspect of it. If more questions about this, we can talk about tomorrow. Pass.